Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about proper handling and storage of the SAL-T standards and how to determine whether or not the standards are still good or if something's happened to them. Now the SAL-T standards are used to calibrate and verify your water activity instruments. For more information about how to do verification and calibration, please see the link in this video. These SAL-T standards are saturated slurries and are meant to be used again and again and can have an extended shelf life if they are stored properly. Here we have an example of one of the SAL-T standards. Notice that it's stored inside of a container with a screw top on it. When you're going to use the standard, you simply open it up and use the standard. And when you're going to not use the standard and store it, you put it back in the container and then tighten the lid, clear down tightly, and then store at room temperature. And if you do this, then you will have maximum shelf life for these standards. You can use them for an extended amount of time. But how do you know if the SAL-T standards are not good anymore? What are the most common ways that they can fail? Let's talk about, and I'll give you examples of ways that problems can happen with the SAL-T standards. Now, these SAL-T standards come at specific water activities. If the water activity of the standard, such as the one shown here, is 0.11, if that water activity standard is left open in a room that's at higher humidity than the standard, which it most often will be because that's a low water activity, then the standard will take up moisture as it tries to equilibrate to the relative humidity of the room. Oppositely, a standard whose water activity is higher than room humidity will lose moisture to the room and will start to harden and dry out. Let's take a look at what a standard would look like if you had left it out and not properly stored it. So in our first example, we have a 0.11 standard that was left out to the room. Notice that there are no salt crystals in the standard. If we compare it to a good standard, and the reason this doesn't have an RFID chip on the bottom like this one is because it's been taken off for examples. So you'll notice in the good standard, you can see the salt crystals, while in the standard that's been left out, there's just liquid inside of there. And in fact, if you look at the surface, it's actually puffed up here on the top because it's filling up with so much water after having been exposed to room humidity. For a standard whose water activity is higher than room humidity, what you'll see is a loss of moisture causing there to be hard, full crystals in the bottom of that standard, which case that's not going to read correctly because of that water loss. Now, another way that these standards can have problems is if that RFID chip on the bottom gets damaged. That's how the LabMaster Neo determines what standard it is through its auto calibration process. So it's never a good idea to take these standards and slam them on the table on the bottom because that could damage that chip. If you just shake them in your hand, that's plenty. It's a good idea to do a shake on them before you use them just to make sure they're fresh. And then the last possible problem that we can see with these standards is if they are not handled properly, there's a chance that especially if you have something sharp around them, that you could possibly puncture the top part of that standard and it will actually start to leak. So in this standard, you can see there's actually liquid on the top of the cup that's come from the standard leaking out, and the standard is covered in salt crystals as we're actually having liquid leak out of the standard and get it all over the cup. In that case, that standard has been ruined and it can't be used again and would have to be replaced. So let's review then. The important things in dealing with the SAL-T standards: number one, make sure they're stored properly. Low standards will take up moisture. High standards will lose moisture if they're left exposed to the room. So make sure they're put back in their containers and the lid is tight on top of the container, stored at room temperature. Number 2, be careful to not use sharp objects that would puncture the top of any of these standards. That filter is in there for a reason, and there's no reason to ever remove it or try to puncture it. And then make sure that you treat them properly so that there's no chance of damaging the RFID chip. If you follow these simple rules, your standards should have an extended shelf life, and you'll be able to use them again and again to check the readings of your water activity instrument. Thanks for tuning in, and check out our channel for additional videos describing how to use your water activity instrument.